Sticking with the theme of racism, the R word was used with quite gleeful abandon this week at the Labour Party conference. Keir Starmer called Nigel Farage's deportation plans racist. Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, said that Nigel Farage was worse than racist. And David Lammy insinuated that Nigel Farage had some sort of involvement with the Hitler Youth. Harry, what have you made of this? I mean, clearly, Farage was the ghost at the Labour conference. They couldn't talk about anything else.
It was the first Labour conference, I think, in about 18 years that I haven't had to go to.
Lucky you.
Quite welcome relief, but from watching it from afar, I have to say it looked nuts. Like, I don't know, the perspective you get from 4.5, 5,000 miles away. I was sort of looking at it thinking, what are they doing? Just at the moment, we're having a debate in America about political violence, the use of language. Maybe not calling Charlie Kirk a fascist and a Nazi for the last 10 years by the left. Might have not have seen the horrific scenes we saw in Utah, three and a half weeks ago. Look, I mean, when you are screaming Nazis and, Hitler Youth, and you have the Prime Minister of Great Britain using his biggest platform of the year to declare a politician an enemy of Britain, is think, whoa, they are living rent-free in their head, but really they don't have a plan to deal with Nigel Farage. And, they tried saying he was a friend of Putin's. They tried to say he was going to sell it to the NHS to Donald Trump. And now they've just gone with the old classic racist. And I think that word is losing its effects. We were discussing this on our show last night, and it was like, it's bandied around so much these days that it just goes into the noise. It's not like, 10, 15 years ago where, being accused of racism by a progressive, was essentially the end of your career. You were drummed out of polite society. These words and slogans are bandied around so much that actually I just think there's kind of wash over people. And the public are looking at that and saying, well, look, you're calling him a racist for, frankly, fairly menial reforms to indefinite leave to remain, but maybe asking, hang on, if you have indefinite leave to remain in this country, maybe every 5 years we should check you have a job, you haven't raped someone, and you check you can actually speak English. I mean, it's not exactly, this isn't exactly rivers of blood and Enoch Powell, is it? This is a fairly minor policy suggestion, which I think most members of the public, who've actually read into the detail of it, would see as fairly reasonable. And fairly moderate, and if the immediate dismissal from the likes of your Lammies and your Starmers is, oh, it's a load of you're racist. Well, you're kind of calling me racist. Then if I back that, and I just think they're also making the same mistake that the Democrats over here made. We had Donald Trump voters called trash in 2024, and he turned up in a trash lorry. He sort of leaned into it. Hillary Clinton, the famous deplorables row in 2016, and Kamala Harris basically dismissing Trump as a joke and a racist and a bigot, and look what it did for them, right? It didn't work. In fact, you argued it galvanized Trump's support in a way, and I just don't understand why you look at what happened over here with the Democrats and you're a Labour strategist and you go, well, you know what? I'll have a bit of that. It's bonkers.
It also works so well to stop Brexit, stop the rise of Boris Johnson. It's, a tried and true, tested, strategy.
No, exactly. I mean, it's a little bit reductive, but you could say the political story of the past 15 years is governments, but centre-left governments in particular, calling voters and even their own voter bases racist and then being surprised that they won't vote for them again. I mean, especially in the context of the fact that Reform are hoovering up enormous amounts of support from people who voted Labour, certainly constituencies that voted Labour last time around. To double down on this and to, they make this fine distinction that we're talking about the party or the policies, we're not talking about the voters. That's not what people are going to hear in exactly the way that you say, Harry. And it's just become absurd. I mean, David Lammy running around saying that Nigel Farage, flirted with the Hitler Youth, an organisation which was disbanded 20 years before he was born.
Yeah.
I know it refers to one particular allegation which has been strenuously denied and some would argue debunked about him singing songs as a schoolboy or what have you. I mean, it's maybe you expect that kind of level of historical literacy from, David Lammy, a man who on Mastermind thought that, Henry VII came after Henry VIII and so on. But it's still, it's by turns very destructive to public debate in the way that we've talked about, but also it just seems like as if these parties have got a death wish. Like, why would you double down on a strategy which has dealt historic humbling to parties, largely the centre-left and not exclusively, every time they've been tempted to reach for it.
And it's also, I mean, for the sort of layperson watching along who's not necessarily going into the details, people will be confused because Labour is also looking at reforming indefinite leave to remain. Now, the policies are different. Farage's policy will apply to people who currently have that status, but still, from you think, is it the sense that people will get is that it's racist when Nigel does it and not racist when Labour does it? Harry, I mean, one of the things that has been coming out is like Starmer's popularity is plummeting. There was polls suggesting that he may be the most unpopular, or is the most unpopular prime minister since polling really began. More unpopular than even Liz Truss, bless her. Can he last in the job? Because the Andy Burnham challenge seems to have been seen off, but how long can he last, do you think?
Well, on paper, look, he's still got that whacking great majority, though, as we saw with benefit reforms, having a big majority ain't what it used to be in terms of party management. I think it's twofold, really, isn't it? It's is there anyone else that can take the job? Obviously, Angie Rayner, imploded. Sort of Andy Burnham gave us a short and delightful reminder of quite how crap Andy Burnham is. I'm old enough to see him do this, 3 times now?
The rest of the lobby seem to have forgotten how bad he was.
Got worse every time. There is a real dearth of talent, I'd say, sitting around that cabinet table. And it's also a kind of better the devil you know, right? It's like if Starmer goes and Reeves goes, the people that are replacing them are not going to be better. They're suddenly going to get like some sort of, there's not like a sort of figure waiting in the wings to sweep in. And, Rachel Reeves actually is kind of fiscally kind of fairly, competent and moderate in terms of some of the others. And you've got, the bond markets are looking at the UK, looking at how fact we're spending more on debt interest now than we are spending on defence education. They're looking at the rising cost of the NHS, which is going to basically take up half of day-to-day spending by the end of this decade. And, suddenly Rachel Reeves looks like a kind of moderating influence on the impulses of the Labour Party to splurge. So I think he's in a slightly stronger position than he looks. But it's going to be a slow slog to 29, 28, 29, whenever he goes, because ever he goes to the country, because, as you say, he's deeply unpopular. I don't know what he's going to do to turn it around. The public have taken, he's bailed the public's sort of sniff test on him. And, it's almost in the worst of all worlds. He survives, but he survives wounded.
Yeah, definitely. Tom, any more thoughts on Starmer?
No, I think it's one of those things where it's been striking how hated Starmer is, given how naff and insubstantial he is. It's an incredibly potent combination. Someone who's so milquetoast and yet elicits so much rage from various sections of society. It was interesting, that poll that put him as the most unpopular prime minister since they've bothered to ask the question. Number 2 and number 3 were Rishi Sunak and John Majors. So maybe there's something about that kind of out of ideas, sort of middle of the road type of character.
A tired administration, but he's only been here for a year.
No, exactly.
Which is really striking.
He's managed to get to as we talked about last week, the kind of Cohen's hotline period very, very early on in his tenure. And what's interesting is that there's obviously a lot of debate about what the government needs to do to try and claw back a little bit more credibility, either with their core vote or with the country at large. And you do think they're just in a uniquely invidious position because of the fact that the things that Keir Starmer would need to do to align himself more with the views of the public are what would mean that he can no longer be leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And so that core kind of conflict and confliction is something that it's almost impossible to get over. But I do just always go back to the kind of collaying that happened after he was elected. The idea that we were returning to a period of wonderful stability, that in the words of Andrew Marr, we were looking like a kind of little oasis of stability in a very rupturous Europe.
It's so quiet now, isn't it?
Caitlin Moran in the Times was sexually aroused by the prospect of Starmer's premiership. I mean, I don't know if she feels this fruity today, but
do write in, Caitlin. I know you watch, so please,
Yeah, it's got a little early here for that thought. Thank
you. Before we move on, I did want to raise. I don't know if people saw this, but in the toilets at the Labour Party conference, people were told that consent matters. There were these signs suggesting that you should have consent whenever you touch a fellow delegate, including before shaking someone's hand. So there's a sort of student union vibe definitely to the to the Labour Party conference, which you'd have thought the spin doctors would have wanted to not show.
Who's shown up to Labour conference if that needs to be the front?
They
That's
need
the other
to be
thing, like there's
told.
these lectures on consent. That's slightly alarming, but